Okay, so it's been a while that we are Isaac in Hilchas Tefillah. And in these difficult days, what is more important than Tefillah? What is more important than Tefillah? So when I spoke Shabbos to my Kehillah, and how do I speak Chalamoid, Shabbos Chalamoid to my Kehillah? My Kehillah now consists of 14 people. So as many in Eretz Yisrael, I paskined that you could have a minyan from Chatzeres, from Mirpesot, and in Eretz Yisrael it's very broadly accepted. So in my backyard, some of you visited my home. Rabbi Gaddisman did many times. So we are 5 shchenim, one on top of the other. We all see each other. And I get up on a chair and I say Divrei Chizuk and I give shiurim. So usually Chalamoid, throughout Chalamoid, I speak to about 10,000 people. Every day there are 2, 3, 4 shiurim. Every shul, there are only major shuls, and throughout the Chalamoid I speak to 10,000 people. This Chalamoid I spoke to 10 people. Well, by Zoom I spoke to many, but my Kehillah now consists of 14 or 15 people, our neighbors in 6 different Chatzeres. So we see each other over the fence, and Baruch Hashem. The ikar is we have the opportunity to be Marbitz Torah. So I spoke about Shir HaShirim. And in Shir HaShirim, the Seforno in his introduction writes that Shir HaShirim is a story about Golus. The Doid and the Raya love each other desperately, but they cannot connect and they don't seem to find each other. That is the story of Golus, says the Seforno. And the Raya runs around town and she says, where is my dad? Where is he? Where has he gone? He went away, he's far away. But the Pasuk says, he's not far away, he's very close. He's very close. So why doesn't he show his face? Why doesn't he open the door? Because he says, Hashmi'ini es koilech. And the Seforno says, Hashmi'ini es koilech is tefillah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mesabel tefillosim shel tzadikim. He wants to hear us plead. He wants to hear us pray. He wants to hear us cry. So we have a feeling that we learn so much, we daven so much, but obviously it's not enough. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu still says, Hashmi'ini es koilech. So in these difficult times, nothing is more important than tefillah. So it's most appropriate that we are Isaac in Hilchos Tefillah. And I was asked today to speak specifically about Tefillas Maariv. So there's a machlokes Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua Brochas Chav Zayin Amid Beis. How do we define Tefillas Maariv? Is Maariv similar to Shachas and Mincha? The Ovis Hagdoshim, Avraham Tikkun Shachas, Yitzchok Tikkun Mincha, Yaakov Tikkun Maariv. And does Arvis have the same significance, the same weight as Shachas and Mincha? Rabbi Gamliel says Tefillas Arvis Choivo, just like Shachas and Mincha. Rabbi Yeshua says Tefillas Arvis Rishus. And the Gemara paskins in accordance to Rabbi Yehoshua. Tefillas Arvis is not a Choivo, but rather a Rishus. So Toisus asks a Gavaldige Kasha, and all the other Rishonim follow in the footsteps of Toisus. So why does the Gemara say Shochach Yalav Yavoy Ba'arvis? You don't need to say the Shemona Esrei again because Ein Mekatchen Asachodesh Balaylo. Teipu Klei Mishum Det Tefillas Maariv Rishus. So the reason you don't need to say an other Shemona Esrei, why is it only because Ein Mekatchen Asachodesh Balaylo? And why doesn't the Gemara simply say because it's a Rishus? And if it's not a Choiva, how can you have a Chiyuv to daven again? You weren't Mechuyev to daven in the first place. So Tosfos maintains, and that Tosfos appears many times in Shas. Chav Zayin Amid Beis, Chav Vav Amid Aleph, Lamed Amid Beis, and Brochas Shabbos Daf Tes Amid Beis, Yom Daf Beis Zayin Amid Beis. Many times in Shas Tosfos says, Tefillas Maariv Rishus legabe Choivo ein levatlo bechinam. It's an important tefillah, and it is incumbent upon us. In a way, it's a Choivo. But it's not the same level of chiyuv as Shachas and Mincha. Ein levatlo bechinam, only for a mitzvah oiveres. And some places the Shas Tosfos says not even for a mitzvah veres. So Tosfos says there is a certain level of chayva, but it's not the same as shachris and mincha. Tosfos suggests a different interpretation as well, and that is in Tosfos in Yom Peizayin and in Chigigid Aftes. Kiblu alayu chayva. Originally, Tefillas Maariv really was a reshus. Reshus and nothing more. But Kiblu alayu chayva. And in the concept, in the sort of Kiblu alayu chayva, we find two different interpretations, two different approaches, two different mahalchim. The Rosh in Masechet Brochos, Perik Dalet Alocha Beis, Rabbeinu Yoina, Yud Ches Omed Aleph Medapei Arif. The Rosh and Rabbeinu Yoina understand Kiblu alayu chayva is personal. This person davened Maariv yesterday and the day before yesterday, and the day before yesterday. And he did it many times. And his minhag is to daven every night, and therefore Kiblu alayu chayva. Definitely regarding the halach of shochach loy meyala v'yavai, he davened Maariv tonight. So when he davened in the first place, Kiblu alayu chayva. And therefore, if not, ein mekach nes achodesh b'layla, he would be required to daven again. So according to the Rabbeinu Yoina and the Rosh, Kiblu alayu chayva was something personal. This person, this individual, Kiblu alayu chayva. So if he's about tshuva and he never davened Maariv in his life, there is no Kiblu alayu chayva. Then he's not mechuyev according to this interpretation and the concept of Kiblu alayu chayva. However, the Rif, Brochos Yud Ches, and the Rambam Perek Aleph Halacha Vav, the Rambam writes, Kvar nagu kol Yisrael to daven Maariv, and according to the Rambam and the Rif, Kiblu alayu chayva is not this individual was makabel olav chayva, but it's a kabbalah klolos of Klal Yisrael. And Tosfos and Chagiga and Yuma, as I quoted, bring both different interpretations. Two different mahalchim in Kiblu alayu chayva. Is it a personal kabbalah, or is it the kabbalah of Klal Yisrael? So this is a mahalach that Tosfos quotes in the name of halachos gedolos. But as I just made it very clear, many Rishonim follow in the footsteps of the halachos gedolos. Most notably, the earliest and greatest Rishonim. That's the Rif, the Rambam. Tosfos quotes the halachos gedolos. So two different mahalchim. Is this unique to Tefillas Maariv, or we find a concept of Kiblu alayu chayva by other halachos as well? So the earliest source is Tefillas Maariv. I do not recall at this moment other sources, b'divrei Rabbeinu Harishonim. But by later poskim, we find it many times in many different sugyas. So what is relevant? Halacha l'maaseh. Dova be'itoi, Sfiras U'oima. So we are in the midst of the mitzvah of Sfiras U'oima. So almost all the poskim say noshim are potter from Sfiras U'oima, and that's the Magen Avraham at the beginning of Siman Tov Beit Tes. And why are noshim potter from Sfiras U'oima? Because it's a mitzvah to say shehazman grama. So there's a fascinating Ramban. We won't speak about this today. It's not our sugya, but the Ramban in Kedushin Daf Lamed writes that noshim are chayiv Sfiras U'oima because it's a mitzvah to say she'ein hazman grama. And why would that be? Of course it's man grama. It's ben Pesach Latzeres, no other time. So the new Minchas Osher, Pesach, Sfiras U'oima, and Shavuos, there's an interesting discussion about this and a very, very mechudesh pshat that I suggested in the Ramban. But anyway, the Magen Avraham says women are exempt from the mitzvah of Sfiras U'oima because it's a mitzvah to say shezman grama. But nevertheless, writes the Magen Avraham, Kiblu alayu chayva. And this is a Gavaldig Chiddush. Why is it a Chiddush? Not the Svara. But usually Bnei Ashkenaz paskin in accordance to the Magen Avraham. Magen Avraham was Rosh Verishon to the poskim of his era, especially for Bnei Ashkenaz. But this is a Chiddush that I don't think anyone really accepted halacha l'maaseh. I don't think any later poskim say that noshim are chayiv in Sfiras U'oima mishum shekiblu alayu chayva. So usually we always adhere to the Magen Avraham, but not in this case. In most Kehilas Yisrael, there wasn't a special kpeda that woman says Tefillas Maariv. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't say Kiblu Alayu Chayva. So the Naziris Shimshon, one of the most important and Choshev Achroin in Shulchan Aruch HaChaim, disagrees with the Magen Avraham. And he says a Gavaldik Chiddush. He says Kiblu Alayu Chayva only works, is only relevant if there's a machlokes of Paiskim. Chayev or Potter. So Kiblu Alayu Chayva is Kedas HaMechayev. For instance, Tefillas Maariv. It's a machlokes Rav Gamliel v'Rabbi Yehoshua. It's a machlokes in Amoraim, Rav and other Amoraim, halachic Rav Gamliel or halachic Rabbi Yehoshua. So that is where Kiblu Alayu Chayva is relevant. But no one says Noshim are Chayev, and therefore Kiblu Alayu Chayva just doesn't work. That's the argument of Nazir Shimshon. And the Minchas Chinuch doesn't quote Nazir Shimshon, but in Mr. Shinvav, he also disagrees with the Magen for the same reason. So that is one source, an additional source, Kiblu Alayu Chayva, the Magen regarding Tefillas Maariv. Another Magen Avraham, Tov Kuf Tzaddik Aleph, Malchi Zechroinoi Shoifos. Magen Avraham says Kiblu Alayu Chayva. It's not a Chiyuv Gomer saying 10 psukim Malchi Zechroinoi Shoifos. Kiblu Alayu Chayva. So we have two different Magen Avrahams regarding Kiblu Alayu Chayva. Maybe one of the greatest Chedushim is the Bekiva Ega, Tshuva Bekiva Ega Siman Aleph. Not in the actual Tshuva, but in the Hashmotas at the end of the Sefer. By the Mafteches, or Hashmotas Shel Bekiva Ega, and Bekiva Ega writes that Noshim are Chayev in Sukkah, Lulav, and Shoifar, Mishum Shekiblu Alayu Chayva, which is also a Gevaldik Chiddush. But that is what the Bekiva Ega says. So this Bekiva Ega doesn't fit in with the Nazir Shimshon and the Minchas Chinuch, because Noshim Potter min Asukah min Alulav min Shoifar. It's not a machlokes. But the Bekiva Ega says Kiblu Alayu Chayva, which is also a Gevaldik Chiddush. We're not aware that Noshim Kiblu Alayim Chayva, especially not Sukkah. So the home of the Samsoy for the Noshim were makbid on Atilas Lulav, but not on Yeshiva B'Sukkah. So three additional halachos in which we find the concept of Kiblu Alayu Chayva. Malchi is Zechroin Shoifos, Magen Avraham Tov Kuf Tzaddik Aleph. Tefillas Maariv, Magen Avraham Tov Pei Tes at the beginning of the Siman. Rebbe Kiva Ega Hashmot the Siman Aleph and the Chuvas Sukkah, Lulav, Shoifar. All these three sources are not the personal Kabbalah, but rather based on the Rif and the Rambam by Tefillas Maariv. Kiblu Alayu Chayva of Klal Yisrael. So the Rambam says Kiblu Alayu Chayva Tefillas Maariv. But there still is a difference between Tefillas Maariv and Shachris Mincha, even after Shekiblu Aleihem Chayva. And we find in the Rambam, in Hilchas Tefillah, three halachos, which set Tefillas Maariv apart, different than Shachris and Mincha, based on the halacha Tefillas Maariv Rishus. Perek Gimel Halacha Zayin Hilchas Tefillah Shel Rambam. The Rambam writes, Tefillas Maariv ein medaktikin bizmano, and that is why Rav Tzoli Shel Shabbos b'Yerev Shabbos. Kivin she Tefillas Maariv Rishus ein medaktikin bizmano. Regarding Shachas and Mincha, we are very makbid in Zman Tefillah. You can't daven Shachas before the Alois. You can't daven Mincha before Chatzos. You're not Yoitza. Tefillas Maariv, we daven early. Ein medaktikin bizmano. Even Leil Shabbos, Rav Tzoli Shel Shabbos b'Yerev Shabbos, the Rambam writes, because Tefillas Maariv Rishus ein medaktikin bizmano. Perek Tes Halacha Tes, the Rambam writes, there is no Chazoros Hashatz like Tefillas Maariv because Tefillas Maariv Rishus. The entire concept of Chazoros Hashatz is because the Shliach Tzibah is moitzi misha einoi boki. But because Tefillas Maariv Rishus, he doesn't need to be moitzi anyone, and that is why we do not find Chazoros Hashatz by Tefillas Maariv. So once again, even though Kiblu Aleihem Chayva, but we didn't institute Chazoros Hashatz, because even though Kiblu Aleihem Chayva, it's still fundamentally Irishus. Halacha number 3, Perek Yud, Hilchas Tefillah Halacha Vav, the Rambam writes, a groise Chiddush. Other tefillah, shachas, musaf, mincha. If a person just forgot that he davened, and he starts davening again, second time around, and suddenly he realizes that he already davened, he is poisek be'emtza tefillah. By Tefillas Maariv, he could be mashlim the tefillah. Shemetchila lo yespalel al das chayvo. So the Rambam writes, shachas, mincha, musaf, any tefillah that's a chayvo, if you realize in the middle of davening, you already davened, it's a bracha levatala. You can't daven twice. So it's a bracha levatala. Soon, we'll speak about Kavaldik Chiddush that we find in Rambam, that the custom was be a mekedem that people daven twice mincha every day, mincha gedolah and mincha ketana, perek gimel halacha gimel Rambam. And whenever I mention this halacha, people open their eyes. It seems to be a Kavaldik Chiddush to them. Davening twice mincha gedolah plus mincha ketana, and people don't realize it's an entire siman in Shulchan Aruch Ohr HaChaim. Siman Reish Lamed Daled in Shulchan Aruch HaChaim is the halacha of davening mincha twice. And it's a machlokes between Gedolah Sfarad and Gedolah Ashkenaz. Which one is the Tefillas Chayv and which one is the Tefillas Nedava? Is mincha Gedolah Nedava and then mincha ketana Chayva, or the other way around? But generally, if you already davened, and you realize you're davening again, you stop in middle of Shema Nesa. Tefillas Maariv is different. Because in the first place, it wasn't the Tefillas Chayv, and therefore you could continue. It's a Reshus anyway, it's a Dava anyway. So we do find in Rambam, in 3 clear halachos, even though the Rambam maintains Kiblu Aleyu Chayva, but it still is different than a Tefillah, which is a Chayva Me'ikar Hadin. And therefore, Tefillas Maariv does have different halachos. Ein medakdekim bizmano, im nizkar einoi poisek, and there is no chazoes hashaz. And there is no chazoes hashaz because the shliach tzibah doesn't need to be moitzi anyone. So when the Rambam writes this halacha number 3 that I just mentioned, other tefillas, if you remember in the middle that you davened already, and by mistake you started davening again. So when the Rambam writes you could daven twice mincha, it's only mincha gedolah and mincha ketana. And it's only when you're aware that you davened already and you intend to daven again. But if by mistake you started davening again, poisek b'yemtza. By arves, he's mashlim the tefillah. And the Ravid disagrees with the Rambam, and the Ravid writes 4 words, Ein ka nachas ruach. You know, the signet of the Ravid is fascinating, and many times he doesn't even explain why does he disagree. Sometimes he's so sharp, so chorif, Ein ka nachas ruach, and he doesn't even see it necessary to share with us why do you think the Rambam is wrong. Ein ka nachas ruach. So the Kesef Mishnah's understanding in the Ravid is, well, the Rambam says that Kiblu Aleyu Chayva, Perek Arav al Chavav. So if it's a Chayva, why would it be different than Shachas and Mincha and Musaf? It was Rishus, but no longer Kiblu Aleyim Chayva, and therefore it should have the same halacha as Shachas, Mincha, Musaf. It has evolved into a Tefillas Chayva. Now there is a Tefillas Chayva, it needs to be poisek be'emtza tefillah. That is the understanding of the Kesef Mishnah and the Taina of the Ravid. Comes along Reb Chaim Brisker, and Reb Chaim says, Kiblu Aleim Chayva is on the Gavra, but the Chefza of Tefillah is a Chefza of Tefillas Rishus. And this is so typical of Reb Chaim. So Reb Chaim doesn't need my compliments, but with Reb Chaim, a new era developed in the Ulamei Yeshivas. And most of Reb Chaim's Chidushim are based on the distinction between Gavra and Chefza, as Avi Ben Torah knows. So once again, Reb Chaim comes along, and Reb Chaim differentiates between the Chefza of Tefillah and the Chayva, which rests upon the Gavra. So Reb Chaim says, Kiblu Alayim Chayva is relevant to the Gavra. Whether it's a Kabbalah Protis, as I quoted the Rosh and Tosfos, Rabbeinu Yoina, whether it's a Kabbalas Aklal, as I quoted from the Rif, and the Rambam, Benkach u Benkach. It's on the Gavra. Kibru Aleim Choyv, and therefore he needs to daven. But the Chefza of Tefillas Maariv doesn't change, and it's a Chefza of Nedava, of Rishus, and therefore he could be Mashlim b'Toras Nedava. So that's Reb Chaim Brisker. And Reb Chaim goes following the understanding of the Kesef Mishnah. Why is the Rav Choylek al Rambam? Because Kiblu Aleim Choyvo. Lani es dati, ketalmid kotten adan lefnei raboisav agedolim bekarka. Often in itachas kapas raglav from a Kesef Mishnah. Many times I apologize to my Talmidim and I say, if we would have the right to disagree with Kademoinenu, then we would forego that right. It's not something we enjoy, but it's probably a choiva and not a schus. It's not a privilege, it's an obligation. And every Talmid Chochem needs to learn with the light HaKodesh Baruch Hu gave him. V'sein chalkeinu b'serosecho, the Gohan says, V'sein chalkeinu b'serosecho, each and every one has his own chelik in Torah. And this is my chelik in Torah. So many times I find myself apologizing to people, but I disagree with the Kesef Mishnah, with the greatest Tachnoah and his matlas, Ofrani Tachas Kapas Raglav. But I think when the Ravid states a general disagreement, why doesn't the Ravid explain what his kasha is? In most asagas he does. So I think when the Ravid has just a general disagreement, the Ravid is choylek al ikar svoras Rambam. So the argument of the Ravid would be, L'shittas Rambam perek alav halacha vav, that the Rambam says kiblu anayu choyvo, and it's no longer a rishus. Rambam l'shittasoi tzorech iyun. Then the Ravid would explain that. So when the Ravid just comes along and he says, Ein kan nachas loch, ein advorim nachoinim, I think the way to understand the hasaga is me'ikra de dina perocha. It's not because l'shittas Rambam l'shittasoi kiblu olayim choyva. The Ravid disagrees fundamentally with the entire concept. So my understanding in the Ravid would be, Rishus is not nedava. Two different concepts. Nobody says that Tefillas Maariv is a Tefillas Nedava. Tefillas Nedava is like a korban Nedava. Tefillas Maariv is one of the three Tefillos Kavuos, Yankov Ovinu Tikkun Arvis. So Arvis is a takana. So there are two different opinions. In Brochas Chav Amid Beis, what are the three Tefillas? Avos Tiknum, Keneged Karbonos Tiknum. Benkach, Bekenkach, it's a takana. That's the lesson of the Gemara, Tiknum. Keneged Karbonos Tiknum, Avos Tiknum. So the three Tefillas are either a takana of the Oves Agdoshim Arom Yisuk Yaakov or a takana of Anshe Knesses Agdoilo. So even if Tefillas Maariv is shus, it's not Nedava. Nedava is not a takana. Nedava is totally dependent on your free will. So let's go back to the beginning of the shir. Before Kiblu Alayu Choyvo, what's the teretz of Tosfos to the Gevaldige Kasha? Tefillas Maariv is shus. Why does the Gemara need to say, Shochach Yalav Yober Balaylu? He does not need to daven again because Ein Mekacher Sachoidish Balaylu. And why doesn't the Gemara simply say, he doesn't need to daven again because Tefillas Maariv is rishus? So Tosfos says, it's not mamish a rishus, it's only a rishus. Ein yesh levatlo b'shul mitzvah iveres, aval ein levatlo b'chinam. Tefillas Nedava, you could be mevatl b'chinam. Tefillas Nedava, you have no choiv at all. So it goes without saying, that's a simple assumption. Hanocha pshuta betachlis apshitis, that Tefillas Maariv is a takana. As I quoted the Lashon of the Gemara, it's either avois tiknum or keneged korbonos tiknum. It's a takana. So when Rabbi Yeshua says Tefillas Maariv rishus, he means that the takana wasn't b'toras choive gemura, it was b'toras rishus, but it's a takana. It's a takana either of Anshe Knesses Agdoila or of Yankov Ovinu. And therefore, my understanding of the Rav would be, and the Rav would say, what's the difference whether it's choiva or reshus? Just like you can't have a half a tefillah choiva and a half a tefillah nidava, it's either the entire tefillah choiva or the entire tefillah nidava. And that's why, if you realize you already davened, you need to stop in the middle of the Shmoinesa. The same regarding reshus and nidava, because reshus and nidava are not the same. So, regardless of whether tefillas are choiva or tefillas are reshus, it's not the same as nedava. You can't have half a tefillah reshus and half a tefillah nedava. That's the argument of the Rabbin. So, according to my understanding, it's meikra de dina perchem, and that is why the Rabbin doesn't see a need to explain what's his kasha. The Rabbin says the Rambam doesn't make sense. What's the difference whether it's choiva or reshus? It's not nedava. And just like you can't have a half a tefillah b'toras choiva and a half a tefillah b'toras nedava, you can't have a half a tefillah b'toras reshus and a half a tefillah b'toras nedava. That would be my understanding in Hasoges Aravet. So according to the Kesef Mishnah's understanding, Reb Chaim offers pshat b'divrei Rambam. But according to my understanding, Reb Chaim's teretz is no longer relevant. That's not the kasha. And if that's not the kasha, that's not the teretz. So my teretz on the Rambam would be Rambam Lishitos. The Rambam Sof Perek Aleph Mehilchas Tefillah. It's very interesting. The Rambam is based on the Gemara I just quoted in Brochas Chavavam in the Beis. Tefillas Keneged Korbonos Tiknum. And we find in Perek Aleph Hilchas Tefillah Rambam 3 halachos, which are basically Dina Korbonos, and from Korbonos they come to Hilchas Tefillah. In Shulchan Aruch we find more. Shulchan Aruch writes that because Tefillas are Keneged Korbonos, it is so important to have proper kavanah when you daven. Because a korban is nifsal b'machshava, whether it's machshavas pigul or machshavas shaloi lishma. So just like a korban is nifsal b'machshava, tefillah is nifsal b'machshava. So in Shulchan Aruch and in the later poskim in Darkei Moshe, we find various different halachos, which fundamentally come from Yidei Karbonos, and from Karbonos, they evolve to Hilchas Tefillah. But in the Rambam, we find primarily 3 halachos. There is no Tefillas Nedava on Shabbos, because there is no Korban Nedava on Shabbos. The only Korbanos that you could bring on Shabbos are Korban Tzibur Shekavu Alehem Zman. And because there's no Korban Nedava on Shabbos, there could be no Tefillas Nedava on Shabbos. Halacha number 1. Halacha number 2. You could never daven Musaf b'Nedava, because Korban Musaf was a Korban Tzibur, and there is no Musaf b'Nedava. So there is no Nedava by Musaf. There's no Korban Musaf b'Nedava, so there could be no Tefillas b'Nedava. And the third halacha is, ain't Tefillas Nedava b'Tzibur. There's no such a thing that the Tzibur comes together and the Shliach Tzibur davens at Tefillas Nedava. But Korban is Tzibur or Korban Choyva, and only a Yochid could bring a Korban Nedava. So the Rambam bases 3 halachos in Hilchas Tefillah on the similarity. Tefillah are b'mokoim korbonos. And 3 different halachos are based on this assumption. So I think maybe the Rambam Lishitosoi, because by korbonos there's no third gather. Either it's a korban choiva or it's a korban nidava. There is no third gather, which is a korban shel reshus. Maybe there is, and that's korban toido. Interesting Chasam Sofer and Maramshik. Chuvas Chasam Sofer or Chaim Simen Unalef. Chuvas Maramshik or Chaim Simen Peiches. Both assume korban toido is never a korban choiva. Arbot Sicham Lahoidos by korban toido is not a chiyuv. So it's interesting. Neither the Chassam Sofer nor the Maramshik don't quote sources from the Rishonim. But HaTalmid v'Rabbi HaGodol, the Maramshik was a Talmud of Chassam Sofer and a very loyal Talmud. I can't say this with total authority because I don't spend my time and waste my time on doing something like this. But I learned a lot of Tefillas Maramshik. I love the Sefer. And I think there are no 2 pages in Tefillas Maramshik, 2 pages, 2 sides in which he doesn't quote the Chassam Sofer at least once. Not even the Chassam Sofer quotes his father as much as the Maramshik. So both the Chassam Sofer and Maramshik both maintain that Korban Toido is always a Korban Nedava. That's a machlokes Rashi and Shita Mekabetzes Menochas Ayin Tesumit Beis. Rashi Ksav Yad Menochas Ayin Tesumit Beis writes that one of those, each and every one of those Dalet Shetzrichim Lahoidos, Choilish and Asapa, Chovish Yoitzim Beis Lasurim, Yorda Yamim Olchem and Boriois, is a Toidas Choivo. Shita Mekabetzes on the spot and say the Kotchum, we have Shita Mekabetzes on the daf. Shita Mekabetzes disagrees with Rashi. It's Rashi Ksav Yad. There are 2 Rashis in Menochas. Shita Mekabetzes says we do not find Korban Toida only when he was Noider and Neder to bring a Korban. Only then does it become a Choyro. So Shita Mekabetzes supports the Maramshik and Chassam Sofer, but Rashi is Lehed Yeshalo Kidivrayim. Rosh Peresh Rosh Nadom Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. The Rosh also says Toida is a Chiyuv. Toises Lid Rosh Hashanah Heil Mid Beis. Korban Toida is a Choyvo. So this is a question. So according to Maramshik and Chassam Sofer, it's not exactly an Adovo, but it's a Rishus. But fundamentally, there are only 2 different types of Karbonas, Choivo and Nedava. So maybe the Rambam Rishitosoi, if Tefillas Maariv Rishus, it's essentially the same gather as Nedava. Because Tefillas are like Karbonis. And there's no third gather like Karbonis. It's either Choiv or Nedava, the same regarding Tefillah. So maybe Rambam Nishitosa, but the Ravid maintains Tefillas Maariv Rishus is not Nedava. Nedava is totally voluntary, but Tefillas Maariv is a takona, either Avois Tiknum, either Keneged Karbonos Tiknum. So if Keneged Karbonos Tiknum, why would Arvis be different than Shachas and Mincha? Very simple. Shachas is Keneged Tumit Shel Shachar. Mincha is Keneged Tumit Shel Beinu Arbayim. Maariv is Keneged Averim Ufidorim that are left over. And those we are Maktar Al Gabe Mizbeach Kol Halaylo. That's not a Choivo. That is a Rishus. And therefore, Tefillas Maariv is Rishus. But the Ravid maintains, even if it's a Rishus, but still it's a takona, and therefore Maariv should be no different than Shachris and Mincha, and just like Shachris and Mincha. If you started davening b'Torah's Chayva, and you realize you already davened, you stop in the middle of the Shemoneh Esrei, in even the middle of a bracha. So that Ravid argues, like Avidas Halacha, there should be no difference whether it's a Tefillas Chayva or Tefillas Rishus. Rishus is not Nedava. And just like we can't start it Tefillah L'Shem Chayva and finish it L'Shem Nedava, you can't start davening L'Shem Rishus and finish it L'Shem Nedava. That would be my understanding in the Machlokes, Rambam and Ravid, Shelo K'divrei HaKesef Mishnah. So Tefillas Maariv Rishus, that is the halacha. I just want to go back a few minutes to the concept of Kiblu Aleihem Chayva. So I brought 3 additional sources. Kiblu Aleihem Chayva. 2 Mugan Avraham, Sfiras Oima, Malchis Acholi Shoifes, and the Kiveger Lagaring Noshim by Sukkah Lulav and Shoifo. And I also brought the Nazir Shimshon and Minchas Chenech that disagree with the Mugan Avraham by Sfiras Oima, and they say that Kiblu Aleihem Chayva is only relevant when there's a shitta that it is a chiyuv. We paskin in accordance to the opinion it's not a chiyuv. Then a person could take upon himself the das hamachmirim. But If there's no opinion that he's chayiv, then there's no such thing as kibbul alayim chayiv. What's this for? Why? Why would it be dependent whether there's an opinion, whether there's a shitta that's machayev or not? Why? Why? So I wrote, I don't even recall where, I don't think it's printed yet, but what is the entire concept of kibbul alayim chayiv? What is it? Why is it mechayev? How could a person be moisef al dinay Torah? So one interpretation would be neder, midday neder. It's like nidrei mitzvah. Even if a person is noyag sholish pa'amim, and has a din of a neder, kal v'chaim, when a person says, is makabel, that's my nidrei mitzvah. Hu oimer, ashkim ve'eshna perek ze neder godel nodar le'elokei Yisrael. So maybe it's Medina Nedorim, the concept of kibbul alayim chayva. Or maybe, no. It's like a personal psak. A person has the right to take upon himself das hamachmio, and if it's lechomre, it's as if he is his own poisik, and he paskins for himself kedas hamachmire. So the way I explained the Machlokes Magen Avraham against Nazir Shimshon is these two different approaches. According to the Nazir Shimshon and Minchas Chinuch, person has the halachic authority, if it's a chumrah, to take upon himself das amachmirim, and that's like a psak. And therefore, according to the Nazir Shimshon and Minchas Chinuch, it's only relevant if there is a shitta that's machmir. So legabe atzmoi, a person is as if his own poisik, and he takes upon himself das machmirim. But if there's no opinion that's machmir, then it means nothing. Magen Avraham maintains no, it's Medina Nedorim, nidrei mitzvah, and nidrei mitzvah. Even if there is no opinion that nosham archayev b'shoifer b'sukkah b'lulav, but everybody agrees it's a mitzvah. So Bani Atosis maintain, and that's Minig Ashkenaz, that a woman could make a brocha on mitzvah to say shazman grom. So obviously it's a mitzvah. It's not a chiyuv, but she still has a mitzvah. And if she has a mitzvah, it's a nidrei mitzvah. And therefore the Magen Avraham maintains, and Rabbi Kiva Eiger maintains, even if there is no das machmir, there still is a concept of kibbul alayim chayva. So maybe the machlokes between Magen Avraham and Rabbi Kiva Eiger on one hand, Nazir Shimshon Minchas Chinuch on the other, is how do we define and understand and explain the very concept of kibbul alayim chayva? Is it a din in neder, or is it a din in psak? If it's a din in neder, then we could understand mahalach number one in kibbul alayim chayva, personal kabbalas chayva. But how do we understand that if in the Rambam that I mentioned at the beginning of the shir, that kibbul alayim chayva is klal yisrael kibbul chayva, it's not anything personal. And therefore, I would suggest approach number 3. Kibbul alayim chayva is neither medin nedorim, and there's no such a thing that a person could be his own poisik. That is not binding. There's a process of psak halacha, and there's no such thing. You take upon yourself das amachmiyah, and that's machayev. Why would that be machayev? So my real opinion is kibbul alayim chayva is a din in Torah minhag, and that is the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam. Kibbul alayim chayva is not personal. It's not what you did tonight, or yesterday night, or a day before yesterday, or before that. But rather, the Rambam in the Rif, kvar nahagu kol Yisrael. So the entire concept of kibbul alayim chayva is Torah's minhag, and it's binding. Twice in Shas do we find minhoga milsa shenemar al titoish Torah's imecho. In Masechet Shabbos legabe Edin Herchas Shabbos, B'nei Baishon, Shelo Fligu B'Sfina Mitzor L'Tzidon. And then there's another Gemara in Chulin Daf Tzaddik Gimel regarding Yisur V'Heter. But Torah's minig is based on the Posuk in Mishlei Shema B'nei Musavichu B'al Tirshos Mecho, and Kiblu Le'en Choybo is Metoras HaMinag. And that is the understanding of the Rif and the Rambam in Kiblu Aleihem Choybo. So today's shir was dedicated to Tefillas Maariv specifically. We already spoke about the mitzvah of Tefillah generally. Today we spoke about Tefillas Maariv. So the Tefillas Shlomo, Reb Shlomo Radomsk, and many others forum, primarily Sefer Chassidus, explain what is Tefillas Maariv about. Avraham Tikkun Shachris, Yitzchak Tikkun Mincha, Yaakov Tikkun Maariv. There are many sources, not only in Sefer Chassidus, but primarily in Chazal. Yaakov Avinu was the one, more than Avraham and Yitzchak, that paved the way for Klal Yisrael and Golus. And when Yaakov Avinu goes to Eretz Mitzrayim, that is the first stage of Golus Mitzrayim. Yaakov Avinu paved the way for Kiyum Klal Yisrael and Golus, and that is Yaakov Tikkun Maariv. B'divrei Hanavi, Lilo is a moshel to night. No, it's a moshel to Golus. Night is dark, and Golus is dark. Shomer ma mileel. Nafshi Lashem mishoimrim laboikar. Shomer laboikar is the watchman that stands all night. And he's horrified. It's frightening to be out there in the dark when you can't see what's going on. And danger lurks in the night. Shomer ma'ameleo. Nafshi l'shem shomer l'boike. Just like the watchman, his eyes are fixed on the horizon and he wants to see sunrise. And he desperately waits for the light of the sun. So by night, the predators are out there, the thieves and the burglars and the terrorists. We are waiting for sunrise, for Shachar Shel Moshiach. Yaakov Tikkun Maariv. Yaakov took care of us, La'oilach HaGolus. So Yaakov is Yisrael. And many times I quoted this ayah. Yisrael is the first letter of Shloisha Avos Va'arba Imois. Yud is Yitzchak and Yaakov. Shin is Soro. The Reish is Rivka and Rochel. The Aleph is Avraham. The Lamed is Leah. So the letters Yisrael are the first letters of Shloisha Avos Va'arba Imois. Yaakov had all the koiches, and his Gevaldige Neshama had the Shorshe Neshamas of Avraham and Yitzchak and Surah, Rivka, Rochel, Leah. And that is why the entire nation is called Yaakov. Klal Yisrael as a Shosh of Yaakov, or Yaakov is called by the nation. But Yaakov's name, Ki im Yisrael Yeshemecho, has become the name of the entire nation, the name of Klal Yisrael. Because Yaakov, more than Avraham and Yitzchak, Tikkun Maariv, Yaakov bagleit uns. Yaakov is with us, La'oirach HaGolus. And that is the side of Yaakov Tikkun Maariv. And maybe in Pnimius, that is why Tefillas Maariv is Rishus. Einoi mitzuvah v'oise. Maariv is the greatest challenge. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects Maariv from the depth of our heart. Kemisha einoi mitzuvah v'oise. We are in a time of darkness, and we need the koyach of Yaakov Avinu. We need Tefillas Maariv more than anything else. Yes, it's a period of hester upon him, and we are suffering, especially in America. In Eretz Yisrael, we are relatively well off, relatively. We lost tens of people, but not hundreds, like our community in America. And I feel the pain. I speak almost on a daily basis to American Balabatim. I have family in America. Last week, I lost a friend. We learned together in Cheder. We learned together in Yeshiva, Reb David Fisher from Borough Park. And he passed away to coronavirus. He was a very special young man, a real Ben Torah, and a Ish Chesed. So we all have lost someone, neighbors, relatives, friends, and it's a big nesayin. But we are melumid ben esyanis. I said many times in this period, the very first Yid was Avraham Avinu. And he was the first one to find the Kodesh Baruch Hu without any Messiahs. He wasn't taught by his parents. His father was an Ovid Avodah Zorah. And Avraham fought his father, and he destroyed his idols. He destroyed his Avodah Zorah. So we would expect Avraham Avinu to have a life, a utopian life of nachas, of simcha, of bliss. It was not to be. One nesoyin after the other. That's our destiny. That's our challenge. That's our mahus. That is the essence of being a Yid. Nisyonis. We passed far greater tests. Our parents and grandparents did, and so will we. So this is a time of darkness. This is a Laila. Yankov Tikkun Arvis. These are the tefillas we need. Tefillas and Hester Punim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be makabel all our tefillas. So we are standing before the Chodesh Iyar. Dorshe Rishim is Dorshu. Iyar is the letters. Rosh Tevis. Ani Hashem Roi Pecha. So Chodesh Nisan is drawing to an end. Friday is already the Chodesh Iyar. Chodesh Nisan is a Chodesh of Geula. Chodesh Iyar is a Chodesh of Refuah. Kodesh Baruch Hu said, "And the Refuah Shalem al Chol Yam Beis Yisrael." Kodesh Baruch Hu should be Menachem Shavurei Leiv, Benachomes Tzion Tinucham, all the Avelim that lost loved ones, and all the families that still have members that are sick, that are ill. Kodesh Baruch Hu is shaking Refuahs in Yeshuas and Achamois, and we should be Zeicha B'Korov to a Geula Shlema, Bebias Mashiach Tzedkeinu, B'Mehero V'Yomeinu Amen.
Amen. Yeshua quite a Rav. Before the Rav leaves us today, I just want to forward, going back to something the Rav said. As you mentioned, unfortunately, the Matzv here is still Oyim V'Naira, and the Rabbanim here have been more on Minyanim than in Eretz Yisrael. But over the next week or two, we're hoping Eretz Yisrael may have turned the corner, as you mentioned, and we'll have Refuahs and Yeshuas. So the possibility of what the Rav called Porch and Chutz Minyanim will come back here too when it's Rayu L'Kach Al Pi, the professionals. Could the Rav give us a couple of parameters, since you mentioned at the beginning of this year that you had a minyan that way? Everybody's asking how far is it exactly doimed to the Yisaitis of Zimun? Do you have to see each other? Do you have to hear? How do you handle Kriyas HaTorah? Is Kriyas HaTorah different than Chazaras HaShatz, etc., etc.?
Yes. I actually wrote a 100-page kuntras about various different aspects, tshuvas that I wrote during this ordeal, and it was broadly disseminated. I hope you got it as well. And in the coming few days, it will be an adapted version. And I wrote at length about these minyanim, the Chatzeres minyanim. So just briefly, this has become a huge controversy and machlokes, and it's all I don't know why. To me, it's a milsa de pshita that you could be mitzvah from different mirpesot to different Chatzeres. And I wrote a few different detailed shuvas, which I will happily send to Rabbi Garazman and make it available to the entire tzibur, to the entire group. The parameters are, you need to see each other, not the entire body, but you need to see each other's faces. Not all the 10 need to see all the 9 others, but each and every one of them needs to see and be seen by some of the group. And you definitely need to hear each other. So if you see each other and hear each other, you are mitzdaref. If there's a road between, then you cannot be mitzdaref. You need to be on the same side of the street. If there's an alley between one house and the other, one chutz and the other, they are mitzdaref. But not if there's a road in which cars travel or a major walkway. But if you're on the same side of the street, even though you do have a driveway, they could be mitzdaref on the condition you see and hear. Everybody needs to hear the shliach tzibur. If you can't hear the shliach tzibur, you can't be mitzdaref. And if you are mitzdaref, it's a kol dova shebegusha, including berchas koyanim and kriyas haTorah. So regarding kriyas haTorah, the one that has a sefer Torah in his possession is oile shiva kriyim. And he says the brocha again and again and again. I just want to make one comment. There's a fundamental difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, and I'm sure the American Rabbanim are aware of that. I don't think I need to give eitzes to the Rabbanim in America. I have total trust. We have so many Gedolei Torah and wonderful Rabbanim in America. But we do need to take into account the Chilul Hashem aspect. So if you live not in a totally frum community, having minyanim b'shus harabim and out loud might be very disturbing to non-Jewish neighbors. So I'm sure that the local Rabbonim take that into account as well. So in Eretz Yisrael, we're living in Eretz Yisrael. And most from Yidden and Eretz Yisrael live in from communities. But even if you're not a from community, even a non-from Jew, Savet Nishatn, it's not going to do him any harm to hear people davening. In America, it's different. But I'm sure that the local Rabbonim deal with that question, with the Chilul Hashem aspect. But regarding tziruf, in my opinion, if neighbors see each other, hear each other, they could be mitzdaref. I am troubled. You know, people really want to daven with minyan. So some of these minyanim and etzasor are extremely questionable. When a person doesn't have a merpeset or a chotzer, and he needs to stick his head out of the window and bend his neck like a giraffe, and it is only then that somebody could see him from far away, that is not royim ze ze. Tzorech laharis lemponov. He needs to be seen b'shofi, seen comfortably, not when he stands on tiptoes like an acrobat and sticks his head out of the window. That's not mitzdaref. They need to see each other b'shofi, without making any special effort, without standing on your head and doing acrobatics. But if they see each other and hear each other, they could be mitzdaref on the condition that there's no road between one chotzer and the other. That is my basic opinion, and I will make it available to all of you in written form.